Discover how one CFO's incredible act for a struggling single mom transformed their lives forever. The diner was a haven for Sarah, a bubble of familiarity amidst the chaos of her life. But even here, the world felt heavy on her shoulders. At 34, her bright smile was now but a mask for exhaustion, as she juggled a pair of rambunctious kids, Ellie and Jake, weaving through the clutter of school drop-offs and nighttime shifts. The harsh lighting of the diner reflected on the bills piling ominously at home, each one a reminder of the piecemeal existence she fought against. A single mom with no relief in sight, she faced countless late nights, studying numbers instead of cuddling with her children. The roof above her, already leaky, echoed her sorrow, a structure soon to mirror her own crumbling resolve. A sharp ring from her phone yanked her heart further down. Another reminder of the missed payment. She dropped her head into her hands, a wave of panic washing over her. Was it too much to ask for one good thing to come her way? Biting back her frustration, she looked at her children, innocent, eager faces muddling through the hours of waiting and worry. In their laughter, she felt a bittersweet pang, a resonance of the hope she once shared with her husband, now an ache like a dull roar inside her. As Mark entered the diner, the world outside faded into a blur of board meetings and profit margins. He was a CFO, carved from the corporate mold, cloaked in monetary ethics and numbers crunching under the weight of his ambition. He didn't care for the accolades until he stumbled upon Sarah. Her struggle etched across her forehead could not be ignored. She was a mother battling not just for livelihood, but for her children's hope. Torn between his responsibilities and a growing awareness of her plight, tension brewed within him, a raw urge to intervene clouded by corporate protocols. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Sarah couldn't shake off the presence of someone watching, perhaps even caring. Mark's internal tug-of-war intensified as he discreetly started aiding her, filled her fridge with groceries, glided through paper-laden desks to remove obstacles in her path. Each act bore a weight of his own discontent. Around the next corporate curve, his superior's greed demanded a tighter grip, harsh consequences hanging like a guillotine. It was becoming a dizzy dance of integrity versus ambition, one that Mark now feared he wouldn't dance out of. As hope flickered, it was soon eclipsed by a chilling revelation. Mark's company was entangled in Sarah's financial woes. The concrete ties of corporate greed closed in, squeezing the air out of their growing bond. Fear clawed at his insides. Could kindness cut through the boardroom facade, or would he have to choose between intimacy and ambition? In this suffocating environment, Sarah received devastating news that threatened to send her spiraling. The stakes were rising, and as Mark prepared to address his superiors, unease boiled beneath his skin. Both stood at the edge of an abyss, secret threats looming as decisions clawed at their very souls. Would they care enough to choose what was right, or were they destined to be swept away by a system that had forgotten the heart? The ensuing days dragged on, each filled with a depthless sense of foreboding. Sarah had always been resilient, but the weight of her circumstances pressed harder now than ever. When she received a final notice from the landlord, her blood ran cold. Panic set in, and for the first time, she found herself reaching for a lifeline, considering whether to speak with Mark about the deepening crisis. The diner served as her sanctuary, a place where the clinking of silverware blended with the laughter of children. But now, the warmth felt distant, overshadowed by the urgency of her reality. The kitchen staff moved swiftly, but Sarah remained frozen, caught in an internal struggle. Should she expose her vulnerability to someone who had already done so much for her? Each moment spent debating felt like a lifetime. Meanwhile, Mark grappled with his own pressures. Each meeting with the board tightened the noose of corporate expectations around him. The numbers he so meticulously analyzed had started to mean less to him, overshadowed by the ramifications of his decisions beyond the boardroom. Every time he crossed paths with Sarah, it was a reminder of the stark contrast between their worlds. She represented everything he had once taken for granted, a simple, unwavering hope against insurmountable odds. That he found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just out of sympathy, but from a growing sense of responsibility. Knowing that his company contributed to her plight gnawed at his conscience, compelling him towards action. Would rearranging numbers and making cuts satisfy the greed of his superiors while suffocating Sarah's spirit? Each calculated decision felt laden with guilt as he focused more on finding a way out. That wouldn't cost Sarah everything. Determined to do something tangible, Mark devised a plan, secretly orchestrating a financial review of the accounts tied to Sarah's landlord. He wanted to understand the profitability behind the eviction threats, hoping to find a loophole or a way to stall the oppressive tide of time. Just as he started to feel encouraged, the looming reality of corporate backlash became clear. Would they care about one struggling mother if it meant profitability suffered? Back at the diner, Sarah's internal battles began to shift. She spent her downtime contemplating how to regain control over her life. What if she took charge, applied for better jobs, or even pursued the long-abandoned dream of going back to school? Her dreams felt so distant, but each fleeting thought propelled her toward a decision. The small flickers of determination she once buried deep inside began to surface again, but the fear of failure loomed larger, gnawing at her resolve. As she noticed the flyers for community college pinned around the diner, a sense of liberation washed over her. Perhaps the path of self-improvement could lead to independence, a way to provide not just for her children, but for herself. On that pivotal day, as she prepared to speak to Mark, both of their lives teetered on a knife's edge. The moment approached when decisions would not only shape their destinies but intertwine their paths irrevocably. What choice would she make, and how would Mark respond when she unveiled the weight of her reality? The raw potential for transformation hung inexplicably in the air, ready to erupt into a new chapter for them both. The morning sun filtered through the diner's window, casting an inviting glow across the worn countertops as Sarah wiped down the surfaces. Each swipe of the cloth was both a ritual and a distraction, keeping her mind occupied while doubt spun relentlessly in the back of her mind. She could already sense the hesitance creeping in, physically manifesting as a tightening in her chest. This was it. The moment she had been preparing for. She was going to speak to Mark. As the lunchtime rush dwindled down, Sarah's resolve partially waned under the weight of impending vulnerability. How would she frame the conversation? Would her tone betray her anxiety? Her internal script shifted back and forth, like a rocky tide, until she settled on an image of herself strong, assertive, and most importantly, deserving of a voice. Mark entered the diner, and the familiar tingle of an electric current pulsed between them. She could see the stress lines etched across his brow, but now she also perceived a flicker of compassion in his gaze. That glimmer fueled her determination, prompting her to abandon any lingering thoughts of suspicion or doubt that had held her back. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but gentle. "Can we talk? I need to share something important." The words propelled forth with a mix of urgency and trepidation, each syllable amplified by the stakes she knew loomed just beyond her now opening mouth. As they retreated to a booth in the corner, Sarah felt the weight of her reality pressing in, suffocating in its immediacy. It became clear in that moment that Mark had been wrestling with feelings driven by responsibility and unfamiliar clash with his corporate path. But more pressing was her own fear. The risk of revealing her entitlements could either sever their budding bond or bind them in one profound moment of truth. "I received a notice," she started, hesitating only briefly before plunging deeper. "My landlord is threatening eviction," and her breath caught. "I just don't know where else to turn." She knew there were other options, perhaps, but none that felt viable or secure at that moment. Mark listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to resolution. This was his inflection too. Would he do enough? What could he do? He felt it within him now, a responsibility to offer support without becoming the very institution that dictated her suffering. They spent the next hour discussing potential solutions, the conversation flowing unexpectedly easily. Sarah felt empowered, sharing her dreams of going back to school, the light of hope shining brightly within her as she articulated each ambition, each desire to reclaim her narrative. For the first time, she felt like a co-author of her future, not just a passive character in a story beyond her control. Mark's face lit up with ideas, his role shifting from a corporate cog in the machine to someone ready to champion Sarah's cause. They drafted a plan together, outlining a pathway that involved connecting her with local resources that could assist with housing and with school registration. Each jot of information felt like a reassurance, a building block for both their futures, yet as they concluded, an unshakable doubt gnawed at Sarah's inner peace. While finding hope in a newfound purpose, would pursuing her education truly mean sacrificing her current security? And could Mark genuinely make a difference without further jeopardizing his position? Moments passed as silence filled the space between them, thick with unspoken truths, each harboring its own potential for disaster or liberation. In that fragile quiet, Sarah brewed with questions, mustering the courage to face the next phase. Would the help they conceived be enough, or would her precarious situation pull her under again? The time to make further decisions had arrived, converging on a point where their lives could twist apart or knot together more tightly than ever before. What moral risks would emerge next, as both Sarah and Mark forged ahead with their gamble? Sarah left the diner that day with a newfound sense of clarity, her mind racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. She replayed every word shared with Mark, probing the depths of his insights and the warmth of his encouragement. Yet, the closing of that booth felt like the first step into a vast, uncertain landscape. Could she truly depend on him? The nagging thought clung stubbornly to her consciousness, like a whisper of hesitation in a shifting breeze. The walk home was a blur of faces and sounds, the mundane clamor of the city merging with her chaotic thoughts. She had always believed that moments defined her, a series of choices strung together like pearls on a delicate thread. But now, there was tension in her chest, a tightening of resolve and an instinct that she was teetering on the edge of something monumental. The balancing act between hope and despair stared back at her from every alley, every shop window. Her small apartment loomed in the distance, dimly lit and echoing with the realities of her struggles. Inside, the silence wrapped around her like an old coat, familiar yet worn thin. She deposited her bag carelessly and headed straight to the kitchen, the routine of adjusting her life momentarily eclipsed by an alarming truth. She had to take control. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, an idea flitted in and out of her consciousness. Why not dive deep into the resources Mark had mentioned? A user-friendly website for education, local charities she could explore for housing options, or even potential grants for students returning to school. Each clicked link could be a gateway to transformation. Each phone call could change the trajectory of her life. Motivated, she pulled out her laptop, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as she searched for every morsel of information available. The more she uncovered, the more empowered she felt. Hours slipped by unnoticed, consumed by the thrill of possibility. She filled a notebook with names, dates, and potential contacts, like acquiring pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that had eluded her for so long. But amid her eagerness to forge a new path, the weight of her reality settled back in. This newfound action didn't come without its burdens. Each application she filled out sent waves of anxious doubt crashing against her resolve. What if she was rejected? What if the eviction notice still loomed heavy by the end of the month? A sudden grimace flickered across her face as she contemplated the prospect of another denial. Self-doubt tightened its grip, sprouting seeds of insecurity that beckoned her to retreat to the safety of her current situation, a place where she was known, even if it was within the confines of her struggles. Just then, the phone buzzed, breaking the tension of silence. It was Mark, his voice a calm balm to her frayed thoughts. "Hey, I just wanted to see how you were feeling after our talk," he said, the warmth in his tone steadying her doubts. "Have you looked at those resources we discussed?" His intentions were genuine, but a wave of vulnerability surged through her. This discussion went deeper than just her fears about schooling and eviction. It was about trust in his willingness to help her despite the risks it carried for him, and trust in herself to be strong enough to seize the opportunity. "Yes, I started looking into some options," she replied. "I'm planning to reach out to a few places." Silence hung momentarily, their unspoken understanding hovering between them, a dance of mutual support and the weight of unaddressed fears. "That's great, Sarah," he encouraged. And remember, it's just the beginning. We're in this together. Just take it one step at a time. She felt a flicker of gratitude, her pulse stabilizing at his words. As they wrapped up the call, renewed determination coursed through her veins. This wasn't merely a gamble for survival, it was a chance to redefine her existence, but just as the warmth crept back in, another thought pierced the bubble: how would she navigate the fragile line between hope and the stark reality of what lay ahead? The stakes were climbing, and Sarah understood that each step toward the future meant facing the ghosts of her past. The next morning, as the muted light filtered through her window, a fire ignited within her. She was determined to forge ahead, but shadows loomed on the horizon. Would Mark's involvement push them both into a vulnerable territory they couldn't navigate? Shifting toward the edge of her burgeoning journey, the tightening anticipation surfaced again. The moment of truth approached, and Sarah braced herself for what lay ahead. Would they emerge together, or was this the beginning of unraveling everything she had worked for? The morning sun seeped through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow that ignited Sarah's determination. She could feel a change in her veins, a pulse of newfound ambition. As she sipped her coffee, she took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was in a crucial transitional phase of her life, a decision-maker facing the unknown. The echoes of yesterday's doubts began to recede, giving way to a sharp focus on the tasks that lay ahead. Her notebook lay open on the kitchen table, filled with scribbled notes, contact names, and potential pathways. Tension intertwined with determination as she prepared to make her first call, a charity that provided support for single parents pursuing education. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the dial pad, but the thought of the eviction notice lurking behind her forced her into motion. No more waiting. "Hello, this is Sarah," she started when the call connected. Her voice trembled slightly, yet she pressed on. The conversation flowed in fits and starts, her enthusiasm battling with nerves. By the end, they had set an appointment for the following week, and she hung up feeling an electrifying mix of relief and anticipation. Fueled by the small victory, Sarah didn't stop there. She spent the rest of the day researching other organizations, crafting emails, and filling out grant applications. Each completed form was a step away from the shadows of her struggles. With every keystroke, she emerged further from the fog of self-doubt. But with each bit of progress came reminders of her vulnerabilities. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her dependence on Mark might lead to complications they weren't ready to handle. Just as she was starting to believe in her capability, she felt a flicker of fear in the pit of her stomach. What if this partnership meant exposing herself to disappointment? As the week progressed, Sarah made contact with a local college advisor, who opened new portals to her dreams. They discussed classes she was genuinely passionate about: photography, graphic design. That spark had dimmed over the years, but it reignited as she spoke about her interests, revealing what lay beneath her struggle. It felt liberating to articulate those desires. Yet, interest alone wouldn't guarantee success. What if she fell short in her coursework? Would she be able to balance school with her responsibilities at home? A sinking dread clawed at the edges of her mind. A storm of what-ifs threatened to drown her newfound resolve. In the face of uncertainty, Sarah decided to reach out to Mark. As much as her pride urged her to shield herself from appearing vulnerable, she realized that opening up would serve them both. They needed to be on the same page. She sent him a message suggesting they meet again to discuss their burgeoning connection and her progress. When they met later that week at their usual diner booth, she noticed a shift in her feelings: nervousness, yes, but also a sense of calmness. Mark's presence felt steady, and it reminded her she wasn't alone in this endeavor. As they delved into her successes, she shared her fears, her worries about the future and her apprehension about relying too heavily on someone else. "Every step you're taking is a step toward not just survival, but thriving," Mark replied, his voice warm. "We're all a little vulnerable, you know." The conversation unfurled with ease, yet a subtle tension lingered beneath their words. His affirmation offered comfort, but she couldn't help questioning how taking this leap together might impact their relationship and her ability to maintain her independence. Just as the conversation reached a high point, an unsettling thought crept in. What if by accepting support from him, she was inadvertently losing part of herself? The loading weight of that realization clashed with her desire to go after her dreams. It was a paradox, and within the contrasts laid the heart of her personal struggle. She felt the intensity of the moment wrap around her, the responsibilities of her past loomed large, making each step into the future feel perilous. As they wrapped up their meeting, something shifted inside Sarah. She understood that this path would require not only courage but a delicate recalibration of independence and trust. Neither alone would suffice in this complex dance. They needed to weave their intentions together, but could she find the right balance? Leaving the diner, she felt invigorated yet torn. The evolution of her journey was becoming undeniable, but could she navigate her reliance on others without losing her identity in the process? What awaited her at the end of this dual path of independence and collaboration was shrouded in mystery, and the stakes were rising. The moment of truth felt imminent, and she understood that the greatest challenges lay not just outside of her but deep within herself. The following week loomed like a mountain before Sarah, its shadow both ominous and invigorating. Her appointment with the charity danced at the forefront of her mind, an unfamiliar blend of hope and anxiety intertwining into a knot within her stomach. She rehearsed her pitch in the mirror each morning, adjusting her tone, selecting the right words. Would she sound credible? Would they see someone worthy of their assistance, or just another statistic drowning in obligation and desire? In the days leading up to the meeting, her thoughts spiraled. She spent hours not only preparing her questions but also worrying about how she would be perceived. What if her story wasn't compelling enough? What if they saw the marks of defeat etched across her brow instead of the flickering light of ambition? Each trip to the bathroom became a moment of self-reflection, a quick pause leading her to confront the overwhelming weight of her frustration and self-doubt. As she stood in her kitchen the morning of the appointment, overly caffeinated and brimming with nerves, Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Mark. Just remember, the only way to go is forward. You've got this. It was simple, yet something in his text reignited a flicker of confidence inside her. It reminded her that this journey wasn't solely hers, it was a shared venture, whether she liked it or not. This was precisely the mental push she needed. The universe wasn't going to hand her anything on a silver platter, but she had taken the first steps to reach for it. She dressed carefully, choosing not just any clothes but pieces that made her feel powerful and prepared. Looking in the mirror one last time, she noticed a glint of determination in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like an individual ready to challenge her limitations. Arriving at the charity's office, she paused at the threshold, breath caught in her throat. As soon as she stepped inside, scents of coffee and aged wood enveloped her, grounding her. Each chair offered an unoccupied space, welcoming yet intimidating. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that each successful person had once stood in her shoes, uncertain of their next step. The meeting unfolded fluidly. The staff asked her questions, listened intently, as she detailed her circumstances with an unwavering conviction. She spoke of her dreams of education not just for herself but for her daughter, imagining the ripple effect her endeavors could create. But as the conversation progressed, the professionals inside the room probed deeper, unveiling her vulnerabilities in stark relief against her aspirations. "What's your biggest fear?" one asked, with an intensity that captured her entirely. It was as if they had peeled back layers of her resolve to reveal raw and fragile truths. She hesitated. "That I'll fail, and that my reliance on others will overshadow my journey." The revelation startled her, and she became acutely aware of the sinking pit returning to her stomach. There it was, her Achilles heel laid bare. Explaining her fear of dependency felt like stabbing through a festering wound. The staff's eyes softened, recognizing the genuine struggle behind her words, not just the struggle for funding and resources, but her inner battle of wanting to be strong while feeling increasingly vulnerable. The more she articulated her fears, the clearer her own voice became. She realized that vulnerability didn't diminish her power, instead, it turned her story into a canvas of resilience. They didn't just hear her words, they felt her passion and the weight of her dreams. There was something enlightening about sharing her truth liberally, transforming her fears into stepping stones. By the time the meeting concluded, Sarah felt unshackled. Maybe her path forward wasn't solely about independence but also about learning to trust those who wanted to help. The connection sparked not just external opportunities but an internal understanding, one that blended vulnerability with ambition. As she drove home, her thoughts turned to Mark. Would he understand how much this breakthrough meant to her? She felt lighter, her decisions clearer, yet the uncertainty of their relationship still loomed. Navigating her evolving identity while relying on another, where would that lead? A renewed urgency surged through her, a call to not just transform herself, but to embrace the unfolding relationship with Mark. Empowered by what she'd achieved, she planned to reach out, to strike a balance between self-reliance and trust in others. As she parked her car, a flood of resolve surged within her, ready to embrace whatever revelations lay ahead. Could her next conversation with Mark further alter the landscape of her life? Would they be able to continue on this journey together, not as two separate entities but as a unified force ready to break barriers? The very questions hung in the air, waiting for her to find the answers. As Sarah stepped into her home, the comforting familiarity of its disorder struck her. Toys scattered across the living room blended with the echo of potential waiting to be realized. The moment she closed the door, she hesitated, her heart still racing from the meeting. A part of her wanted to dive into the chaotic domestic sphere, bury her achievement beneath chores and the day-to-day grind, but a stronger part urged her to confront this newfound resolve. She glanced at the clock. It was still early, and Emily would be at her friend's house for another hour. That time could be used, not for mindless distractions, but to strengthen her path. Sitting at the kitchen table, she spread out her thoughts like a jigsaw puzzle, ready to align the pieces of her ambitions. With a deep breath, Sarah opened her laptop and revisited the notes she had made before the meeting. Insights flowed through her mind, vulnerability, yes, but also the affirmation that her story was one of resilience. She began typing furiously, drafting an email to the charity. She wanted to express gratitude not only for the opportunity to share her story but for allowing her to embrace the transformative power of collaboration. The words poured out of her, each sentence grounding her conviction further, but as she typed, another thought crept in, igniting a flicker of anxiety. Had they really understood her? Did they perceive the depth of her drive, or had they merely viewed her through the lens of charity? Questions lurked like shadows, making her second-guess the strength she had revealed. This internal conflict had become too familiar, and for a moment, it threatened to overtake her momentum. No more second-guessing, she whispered to herself, shaking her head as if to dispel the doubts. She hit send on the email, a decisive act that solidified her commitment to the journey ahead. The act felt liberating, the moment a pivot towards something more profound than her previous self. As she stepped away from the table, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark, asking if they could meet later that evening. A mix of excitement and anxious anticipation coursed through her. Here was another opportunity to explore the evolving dynamics between them. They had connected on the surface, but there was more at stake now, her fears and aspirations laid bare. Would he still see her as the strong woman striving for independence, or would those vulnerabilities be perceived as limitations? The thought of sharing her recent achievements and rekindling their relationship filled her with both anticipation and anxiety. She resolved that this time wouldn't be just about sharing her concerns, it would also be about unleashing her newfound strength. How could she expect Mark to believe in her potential if she doubted it herself? The hours marched on, and as she prepared, Sarah envisioned the conversation they were about to have. She would lay her aspirations alongside her insecurities, urging him to engage rather than to shield her. Perhaps, she pondered, trust could be a two-way street. Each interaction could serve to anchor them amidst the complexities of their individual lives. Driving to the cafe where they had agreed to meet, the crisp evening air carried an electric charge. Each traffic light felt like a moment of reflection, her thoughts weaving together intentions with fears. She had come too far to retreat into the shadows, this was a moment that could shape not just her relationship with Mark but her perspective on vulnerability and connection itself. As she arrived, the weight of anticipation morphed into a clarion call. This was about more than just a conversation. It was about establishing a framework of trust that both of them could build on. Their paths were intertwined, and tonight, she would confront both her reliance on him and her capability to inspire him in return. Just as she spotted Mark sitting at a corner table, his gaze absorbed in his phone, an unexpected sense of courage surged within her. This was a turning point, but the question lingered: could they each embrace their vulnerabilities, or would they revert back to the personas they always wore? As she approached, the answer loomed tantalizingly close, yet still shrouded in uncertainty, waiting to be uncovered. As Sarah settled into the cafe chair across from Mark, the faint smell of coffee mingled with the warmth of the overhead lights, creating an atmosphere ripe for intimacy. Initially, he seemed absorbed in scrolling through his phone, but as their eyes met, a flicker of recognition danced across his face. In that moment, a spark ignited within Sarah, a determination to tackle the conversation head-on. The interplay of anxiety and expectation heightened her senses. She had crafted a plan for this discussion, but uncertainties loomed large. Would she assert her ambitions without sounding needy? Could she articulate her vision without allowing her insecurities to overshadow her words? She needed to carve out a space that felt authentic, both for her and for Mark. "Hey," Mark greeted with a soft smile, placing his phone down. His voice was warm yet laced with a hint of tension, mirroring her own inner conflict. "Hi," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The simplicity of the exchange propelled her forward. "I've been thinking a lot about my meeting," she began, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, grounding herself in the moment. He leaned in, genuinely curious, and she felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This was about to be vulnerable territory, yet the challenge exhilarated her. "I realize that vulnerability does not equate to weakness. Sharing my story felt like reclaiming my narrative." She paused, gauging his reaction. Mark nodded thoughtfully, stirring a layer of conviction in her voice. "I want to leverage that experience. There's a community I'm connecting with through my work, and I believe my insights can really contribute. It's scary," she added, a tremor hinting at her insecurities, "but it's also thrilling. I'm ready to stand up and lead in a way I never have before." "That's incredible, Sarah," he said, eyeing her intently as if trying to absorb not just her words, but the spirit behind them. She could sense his admiration, and it buoyed her to continue. "But what if they don't see it that way? What if I'm just being foolish, thinking I can step into a role of influence?" The honesty of her vulnerability startled even herself. The hesitation to admit such fears could have been a stumbling block, but she knew by now that transparency could only strengthen her resolve. Mark leaned back, considering her. "You're not foolish. You are driven. You've always had an inner strength that's been evident, but perhaps now you need to harness it even more consciously. What can you do if those doubts come back creeping in?" His question resonated deeply, pulling at layers of her anxieties while simultaneously illuminating possibilities. If she recognized her doubts but chose to persist, what could that reveal about her character? The prospect of developing a plan grounding her aspirations into actionable steps seemed like an empowering path forward. She smiled, momentum swirling within her. "Maybe I could start small, engage with other women at the charity to share experiences, gather their insights. Build a coalition of voices. It's not just about me, it feels bigger than that." "Yes," Mark encouraged, his enthusiasm echoing her resolve. "You have a natural ability to connect. Use it to galvanize others." As they delved deeper into the conversation, Sarah found herself questioning not just what she wanted out of her relationship with Mark, but also what it meant to stand tall amidst her fears. This dialogue was revealing fragmented pieces of her identity, her inherent ability to motivate others, igniting a sense of purpose. Yet, the curiosity of how this conversation would reshape their relationship still loomed in the background. She felt the clock ticking down as they discussed logistics, plans, and the potential of her newfound path. Would Mark remain supportive as she evolved, or would shadows from the past rise between them, threatening to engulf this fragile connection? The cafe buzzed around them, but Sarah's focus amplified, her mind racing with possibilities and the realization that she was on the brink of a shift in both her professional and personal life. All that stood between her and the future was the ambitious leap she was preparing to take. As she concluded her thoughts, a new tension ignited. Had she truly unveiled the depths of her aspirations to Mark, or were essential parts of herself still cloaked in uncertainty? This question lingered as she prepared to further engage. It was a duel of vulnerability and aspiration, a test of the territory they both needed to explore. As she stared into Mark's eyes, the stakes felt higher than ever. What would they both discover when they dared to peel back every layer of their defenses? As the conversation flowed, Sarah felt a shift within herself, a realignment of her priorities that set her heart racing and her mind whirring with new possibilities. Mark's encouragement had punctured the veil of doubt that often clouded her aspirations, but it had also exposed new vulnerabilities. Each word they exchanged deepened her understanding of the role she could play not just in her own life, but in shaping a narrative for others who, like her, grappled with self-doubt. "Let us map out a timeline," Mark proposed, leaning forward, his hands clasped around his mug. "What are your immediate goals?" Sarah paused, the weight of the question anchoring her to the present. It was one thing to express her dreams, but quite another to lay them on the table to be dissected and evaluated. The thought sent a rush of anxiety through her, though it was quickly shadowed by determination. "I think the first step is to create a meeting with those women," she said, testing her voice against the familiar walls of uncertainty. "Get a sense of what they're struggling with, build a rapport. Maybe I can even host a workshop." Mark's eyes brightened, the flicker of curiosity roaring to life. "That sounds incredibly empowering. Have you thought about what topics you might cover?" As she considered his question, she realized how crucial this moment was for her self-definition. Every workshop, every meeting, every word she spoke would be a step towards owning her narrative, not just in theory, but in practice. "I'd like to focus on resilience. Sharing experiences of overcoming obstacles, and how collaboration can create new opportunities." Yet, deep in her gut, doubt coiled tightly. What if her experiences were too ordinary? What if her story couldn't resonate with others? But will they care enough to listen? She thought as the anxiety threatened to trip her up again. Mark seemed to sense her wavering. "The courage to share your story is what will resonate. You've lived through challenges that many women face. Your authenticity will be the lifeblood of these discussions." His words pushed back against her internal dissent, but the shadows of doubt remained. What if she faltered when it mattered most? "I still have so much to learn," she confessed, vulnerability creeping in, peppered with self-doubt. "Learning is constant, Sarah," Mark replied with a reassuring smile. "You're not meant to have all the answers right now. Use this as a chance to grow, to connect with others. And trust that you'll adapt as you go." His perspective lit a small flame of hope, illuminating a path beneath the reservations that had haunted her for years. As Mark continued to encourage her, Sarah felt as though she was on the brink of not just a personal evolution, but a profound impact on the lives around her. What would it mean to step into her power so openly? To embrace the possibility of failure along with the enormous potential for success? She knew it was a risk, she would be vulnerable in ways she had never been before. Yet, this was perhaps the first time she could see her dreams morphing from a distant wish into tangible goals, but still, the thought loomed, what if her efforts failed? What if she became an object of pity rather than inspiration? She caught her breath, feeling the pressure building beneath her skin. After all, risking disappointment meant she was stepping into the unknown, and that reality felt terrifying. In that moment, as their conversation shifted from logistics to deeper discussions on personal growth, she realized that confronting these fears was part of her ascent. The only way to weave her story of determination and resilience was to allow herself to fall, to stumble, and rise again stronger. As she embraced this mindset, Mark leaned back, an expression of admiration on his face. "You're more ready than you realize." His confidence in her struck a chord, igniting a flicker of courage to spiral into strength. Yet, behind that flicker lay a nagging question: could she truly summon the strength to rise against her fears and emerge unscathed? The cafe was buzzing around them, moments drifting on the tide of time, yet Sarah lingered on the precipice of something monumental. A choice loomed before her: to step boldly into her future or to retreat into the shadows of self-doubt once more. Just then, a commotion at the door drew her attention. Someone familiar entered, their presence a sharp reminder of the life she had left behind. Would this turn of events derail her progress or become a pivotal point in her growth journey? The familiar figure of her ex-husband, Daniel, stepped into the cafe, unwittingly shattering the bubble of potential surrounding Sarah and Mark. Their eyes met briefly, a flash of recognition igniting an old tapestry of emotions. Sarah felt her heart leap into her throat. This was the last person she expected to see, and his appearance felt like reality reasserting itself in a world she had just begun to reshape. "Sarah," he called, his voice a mixture of surprise and a hint of caution. As he approached their table, she could sense the weight of the past hanging in the air, ready to suffocate her new energy. "Daniel," she replied, trying to keep her composure. She shot a glance at Mark, who assessed the situation with an unflinching presence. The tension hummed with potential consequences. What if this encounter triggered doubts she had worked so hard to bury? "Good to see you," he said, though their years of shared history felt like a frayed string, barely holding together in the face of their divorce. He hesitated, searching her face for something: reconciliation, perhaps, or an opening for conversation. "I was just passing through," he continued, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I wanted to check in on the kids." As he spoke, she remembered all the late nights sitting in silence, feeling isolated even more so as a single mother. But things were different now. Mark's quiet demeanor encouraged Sarah to reclaim the narrative. "They're doing well, busy with school and friends," she responded, firming her voice, a small smile creeping in despite the tension. This was her territory, no longer shadowed by old insecurities. "Glad to hear that," Daniel replied, yet the edge in his tone revealed an underlying frustration. "I know I've missed a lot, but let's not rehash the past," Sarah interjected, her conviction steady. She felt the energy shift as Mark leaned forward, subtly but purposefully strengthening her resolve. With every exchange, another layer of doubt fell away, replaced by a sense of empowerment. She wasn't merely a victim in a story but the author of her own. "Listen, Daniel. I'm focused on the future now. I have a plan, and it involves carving out opportunities, not just for myself but for the kids." Mark's supportive gaze confirmed her worth, shattering the illusions of helplessness. "Plan?" Daniel echoed, bemused, as if her aspirations were unachievable dreams rather than actionable goals. "What kind of plan?" "I'm going back to school," she declared boldly, surprising even herself at the audacity of her truth. "I'm taking steps to better our lives. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving." Daniel's eyes flickered with something akin to disappointment, or was it disbelief? There was a moment of silence enveloped in disbelief before he cleared his throat, as if trying to reclaim dominance over the conversation that now felt entirely out of his control. "You really think that's possible?" "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. "I've been working to redefine who I am. I'm not waiting for life to happen to me anymore." A deep, profound sense of accomplishment surged within her at that very moment. She wasn't just rising to the occasion, she was grasping the reins of her destiny after years of submission. At that moment, her spirit radiated with newfound ferocity, and she glanced at Mark, whose pride instilled warmth in the air. Daniel seemed to sense something shifting, a realization dawning upon him. "I didn't mean to." "It doesn't matter what you meant," Sarah interrupted, a newfound clarity backing her words. "This is my journey, and I won't let doubt or the past dictate my path." I owe it to myself and to my kids. A silence filled the cafe, heavy yet liberating. Sarah's heart raced with exhilaration, proving not just to Daniel but to herself that she was more than her struggles. As Daniel stepped back, recognizing the walls Sarah had built for her own transformation, she felt another layer of resistance shatter. For the first time, she understood that her worth wasn't dictated by someone else's opinions or expectations. It was crafted from her commitments and ambitions. "Congratulations on your progress," Daniel said softly, the fight leaving his voice. "But remember that I'm still their father." He turned to leave, his figure diminishing in the distance, and with it, the ghost of her past faded further into the background. Mark's warmth washed over her as he returned, the tension dissipating between them. "That was remarkable," he stated, his admiration evident. "You just took a crucial step into your power." She nodded, feeling a sense of calm settling over her. "I never knew I could do that," Sarah admitted, astonished by her confrontation. "Sometimes it takes a reminder that we're not bound by old identities to finally feel free." Mark's eyes bore into hers. "You've conquered so much more than just a conversation. This is who you are meant to be. Let that drive you." In that moment, the final pieces clicked into place. She was no longer fragmented, every challenge transformed into a stepping stone. Her hardships didn't define her but forged her, and she was awakened, resolute, ready to embark on the journey of empowerment and education alongside her commitment to Mark. In her heart, she knew that challenges would continue to arise, but each moment represented growth, an opportunity to embrace vulnerability and strength hand in hand. Determination pooled in her veins, and she felt destiny shift beneath her feet. She was ready to step into her future with confidence and purpose. This was her time, a splendid blend of independence and collaboration, and as she drove toward the horizon, she knew this was just the beginning. She was finally ready to flourish, not just for herself but for her children, proving to them that resilience could break the confines of doubt and paint the reality of possibility, transforming every setback into an exquisite canvas of success. Now, the time has come for you to take action. You need to subscribe now to ensure you won't miss out on exclusive emotional stories that can inspire you to overcome your struggles. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, making sure more viewers can discover these transformative tales. Comment with your reactions and theories about this powerful conclusion. Your insights matter. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. We all could use a little empowerment in our lives.